And we are live on Oz Property Investor. We bring the big names and we have the big fun. How you going, Palise and Plant Palise? Look, he's got a shoulder thing. Look at him go. I love it.
How you going, growth.
I'm good, man. How about you? How you boys doing?
I'm living my best life, mate. I am living my best life. I see that you've been living your best life, flying all over Europe, left, right, and center. So maybe I'm not living my best life.
Always on holiday.
Not on holiday. It's working remotely, all right? I do some work in between the travel.
What I tell my boss, working remotely around here.
Yeah, but anyway, it's coming to an end, Joe. I moved back mid-September, back to Oz full-time. Grand plans to do 9 months Oz, 3 months Europe every year. So we've got like a place here that we bought and Airbnb-ing it out so we can block off summer and then just have like endless summer and go from there. But up until then, I'll be working from Greece for 2 weeks from end of next week. Then back to Oz. Just got to find a rental in this tight vacancy rate market.
For your own PPOR kind of rental. Yeah.
Well, so nice. So like my I could probably get too much personal stuff going on, but like my personal investing is next steps, buy a principal place of residence and then pay it off with business income and passive income in the next kind of 5 years. And then I'm pretty much done for investing. I'm not one of those guys who wants to have 50 properties and that stress. It's just going to be reduce debt, increase the passive income, and just enjoy life a little bit more. Stop working so hard, just start doing 3 days a week and just chill. I'm not, you know me, Joe. Like I'm not the guy who wants to have a Maserati or a yacht or anything like that.
You can just hire one anyway. You can hire it and then give it back and not have to pay the insurance or storage costs and all that stuff. No need.
I don't want it.
There is a stat, I can't remember what it was. It was something like 95% of boat owners would have been better off renting a boat every time they use it financially than buying one.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
There you go.
But then you can't say you own a boat. There's a lot.
That's a tough thing.
Just say you went out on a boat on a weekend. Nobody cares whether you own it or not. I mean, what have you? Well, I mean, the people who matter don't mind, and the people who mind don't matter.
Don't matter. What are we talking about today? What is the plan?
So
what are we talking about?
Why you should not buy commercial. So I thought it was interesting to have a commercial buyer's agent on talk about why you shouldn't buy it, because I mean, that's a bit awkward, isn't it? I hope did we tell Steve that's what we're going to talk about beforehand? I think we did.
Nah, it's fine. It'll be a quick session, Jeff. There are 0 reasons. Good night, everyone. Have a good night.
No. Yeah, I think it's vital because there's too many people out there saying, and too much vested interest saying you should buy these properties or you shouldn't buy, or like you should buy X or Y, or come and visit my town and real estate agents, all that sort of stuff. So I think it's interesting to get you on who you just kind of you tell it mostly as it is. You have a cool beard and you make it happen. So that's why we wanted to bring you on. But that's going to be, so we're going to be unpacking the reasons why you shouldn't, but also some red flags, due diligence in there as well. And as a bonus, we're going to have an around the grounds as to what's going on in commercial property, because interest rates are through the roof, and is it still viable commercial property? That's what I want to hear. I want to get the spicy word from Palise. So did I unpack it enough there, Joe?
Mate, you unpacked it really well. That we are on holiday, unpacked, fully ready to go diving headfirst into this topic. So congratulations. Put your swimmers on, people. We're good to go.
And I'm literally on holidays and unpacked as well. That's why I'm wearing a Kermit the Frog shirt.
We're ready to go. Well, the reason I'm interested in this one is because commercial property is such a great, like a lot of people talk about, you build a portfolio, you build a $6 million portfolio, $7 million portfolio, you sell down half, pay the debt off, and then you keep the other half and then have your passive income that way. But there are alternatives, and commercial property is one of those alternatives where you potentially use residential to grow your capital base, to grow your equity, and then transition that into a commercial asset that gives you 6% net yields, 5% net yields, not gross yields. Like a 5% gross yield and a 5% net yield are two very, very different things. But it's like, where the hell do we start? Commercial property is so confusing. And I think it's good to start with the why we shouldn't and the things that we shouldn't be doing, so we can kind of take that stuff off our list and be like, cool, I fit within this category. that ain't for me just yet.
Kind of like the Joe
know.
Tucker talking about the house and land package. He doesn't look at the house and land. He just takes it right off his plate. It's not on the menu, and then we can move forward.
And it's not right for everyone. You did a good post the other day, Joe, about your personal strategy, how commercial was like an end goal. Some people, it's not. If you can reach your passive income goal or portfolio size goal without commercial, don't touch it. It does come with risks. Like there's bigger, and we'll break that down today and the reasons not to, but they're bigger deposits, more moving parts, need to understand it 10 times fold before you burn yourself. Borrowing capacity changes as well, different lending types. All that. We'll break all that down.
Yeah.
Great. Quote of the week. We did. Have you got one, Joe? I even, that's the one
I
wrote down.
Yeah. Me?
Sorry, Joe, I didn't ask you how you going anyway, Joe. How are you going? You're pretty good.
Mate, I've been all right. Actually, no, I last night I was at an event and there was so many people in the room, and then I realized, Steve, you're running an event. You're running an event when you're coming back, aren't you? Like,
is that happening? That's right. Yeah, in October.
No, not you. Sorry, your mate Andrew Bean.
We haven't got dates and stuff looked in or anything like that. But that's it. Oh, I got a baby.
Well, would people be interested in
my
that?
baby, everyone?
Here's one I prepared earlier. Oh, wow.
This one's been in the oven a little while. Hey, Lisa.
Hey, Rhea.
Hey, Rhea.
She's pretty happy. She wants to, There you go.
I told her to bring Bubs in at some point, so there you go.
Yeah.
No, we are going to run like a commercial meetup. We haven't got dates and all that stuff booked. I've got a big team boat day, which you're obviously boys are invited to. I don't think you're coming, Jeff, unfortunately, because you got something on, but Joe is.
I'm definitely coming. I'm ready.
I'm
ready for it.
Shakespeare in the Park that night, so hopefully Tegan doesn't watch these lives because it's a surprise. So, yeah. Anyway, quotes of the week. I'm really good too. I'm fantastic. But Joe, do you want?
Sorry, mate.
My quote of the week?
What's your quote of the week, Steve?
My quote of the week. Mine was I was actually watching last night on Netflix. There's a documentary about the James Webb Telescope. If you guys know what that is, it's like it's like the biggest telescope since Hubble. Like it's the one where we saw all those really like thousands and millions of distant galaxies and stuff like that. Anyway, there was a quote in that, and the quote was, "No great discovery was ever made without a bold guess." And that was like Sir Isaac Newton's quote, which I thought was somewhat applicable to this because we're talking about like the negatives and the whole thing with investing is trying to take some calculated bold risk, and because you're putting your financial well-being on the line. So yeah, I thought that was a good one. Cool doco as well if you're into space.
Yeah, okay. I'll have to check it out. I like those sort of really quirky sort of things. Somebody said I was, what was the word they used, Joe? I don't know. That was that word that Adrian called me. He called me I don't know, anyway.
Enigma.
That's what I said. But yeah, anyway. So no, that's a great quote, mate. I mean, got to be bold and consider the risk as well.
Yeah. The thing that I really kind of resonated with the documentary was they've been working on that telescope for 30 years. So there's a guy whose like kids were like 6 years old, and now they're 36 by the time they launched it into space, and it cost $6 billion as well to get it into space.
Wow.
That's pretty cheap.
Imagine that. Imagine working on that program that entire time would be so frustrating. You wouldn't get, but it's the same as property investing, right? It is exactly the same.
30 years.
I hear a lot of people trying to get all these quick wins to, retire in 5 years, 10 years. You can build a sizable portfolio in 5 and 10 years, but when you have 5 properties, you got to wait. You still have to wait for time to do its thing and compounding interest and capital growth to actually happen. What about your quote, Jeff? What's yours?
So mine's similar to, well, not similar to Palise, but it's kind of about considering your path that you want to take. So mine is by Robert Frost. So I believe he's either a poet or an author. He's something like that. So two roads diverged in a woods, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. So it's kind of about talking, well, yes, commercial may be risky and it may be scary, but if that's an option for you, then just maybe consider it all, even if it's in property investing. Like some people's families have never bought a property. Like they're just the first people in their family to buy property. If that's a road you want to diverge upon, then great. But maybe it's not for you. But yeah, that's what I took from that.
Good quote.
Yeah, I love that.
Joe?
It's a great little quote. My quote, if you can, My quote is, if you can, you should. And if you're brave enough to start, you will. Stephen King.
Wow.
If you can, you should. And if you're brave enough to start, you will. So you got to make it happen for yourself. No one else is going to help hold your hand in this property journey. Make it happen. Be brave. And have a community of like-minded people that are here to support you while you help them as well in any way that you can. Another good tip, actually, I was thinking about now, this is going to run into a different quote, but it's not really a quote because it's just something I was hearing on a podcast, but it's like trying to network with people. So when you're trying to network with people, instead of just trying to say, what can I get out of this situation? Speak to these people and say, like, what can I give this person? What kind of connection can I make? So if you know a really good mortgage broker and you meet a property investor, tell them about that mortgage broker. Don't try and kind of hold your little network of people. Let the network spread, and all of a sudden you're the connector that helps everyone else. But that's just a little thing.
Even with knowledge, though. So like my business really took off when I actually stopped caring about making money, and I was just like, I'm going to share as much bloody value as I can. And that's when I went on like all the podcasts, and before I was a sponsor of this show, or like you had me on as a guest, and just doing videos and education and giving away all the free spreadsheets and stuff like that. It all came back like fivefold after that. As soon as you just try to
get an Instagram, 1 million views on an Instagram video one time. Something. How did you do that?
And that weirdly, I spend money like filming videos. That was me just turning up to a podcast and someone had filmed me, and I didn't even really know what was going on online. And that was the one that took off, the most natural one where I was actually just giving information away for free. So yeah, I think a lot of buyers agents go wrong because they just try to make money. They're like, how do I get 10 clients? Cool. You should be looking at how do we give value to 100 people before they've paid you.
That's solid advice. That's solid advice for anybody. Okay, let's dive into this thing. Let's make this a great session about commercial property investing and why the hell you should do it or why the hell you shouldn't do it. And is it where in you got to kind of make it up for yourself. Obviously, no financial advice and all that good stuff, but you got to kind of determine for yourself where it fits in for you. So let's dive into the session after this.
The amazing thing with commercial property investing is that in most cases it's cash flow positive from day one, which means that you can drive those profits towards paying down the debt. There are instances with commercial property investing where you can actually have the property pay itself off over 10 years, which is absolutely crazy. With commercial property, you get massive net yields, so you can expect anywhere between 6 to 10%. And as we've seen in the current boom, these properties not only provide large cash flow, they do certainly grow wildly in value too. Now, with big rewards comes some risk, and this is why you should de-risk your investment as much as possible. And the way you do that is with expert due diligence. And this is why we highly recommend people hire professionals to help you along in your investing journey. Steve Palise of Palise Property is one such expert. Being a chartered mechanical and structural engineer in a past life, Steve draws on his analytical and mathematical skills to do that expert due diligence for you. With 6 years experience in the space, Steve has over 1,200 property transactions under his belt. He's the guy you want in your corner, crunching the numbers and finding the best properties in the best locations, along with ensuring that you avoid the mistakes. Steve has actually even written the book on commercial property investing in Australia, and not only is it a bestseller, I believe it to be the most comprehensive in commercial property investing on the market today. He's been generous enough to give us a massive discount for our audience of 50%. So use the code OZPROP, click the link below, get a copy today, and start learning and getting on your commercial property investing journey.
Here we go. And what do you know? We also have Steve Palise in the show tonight. Look at that. So, and speaking about due diligence and all that sort of stuff, I was skimming the posts while I was listening to that. Riveting, great reading, Joe. And somebody's talking about, is Crestmead a good area to buy? And everybody was given their 2 bobs on the thing. And somebody said, oh, no, that's not a good area. They said they were a buyer's agent. So I called it out and said, look, you can't say that first off. And I didn't, but I was saying, oh, because it's a cheap area. I'm like, okay, well, that's interesting that this person has that perspective. So the due diligence is absolutely vital. So where am I going with this? So Palise, he's the guy. If you've, I don't know, I just wanted to mention that. But Palise, he has purchased, what is it now, 1,600? Is it that many?
Yeah, I think last
now
count was about 1650. I reckon it's probably around the mark now.
Joe said 2,000 in a post, and you said social media. What is it? Would you say social media?
Yeah, just fluff up with social media. You're allowed to double things on social media, isn't that the rule? No, okay, sorry. Never mind.
I don't know. Yeah, interesting. Yeah, we could have a whole conversation about that one.
12% yielding properties don't exist then.
Yeah. No, but you have been doing it for what, 10 years now, 15 years?
Yeah, 13 personally. I think 8 or 9, eight professionally now.
Jeez, that's impressive. But also, the thing I love about you, Palise, is you're just out there doing your thing. Like, you love traveling, you love sort of taking time off and doing like traveling. You've been traveling, feels like now, for the last sort of 5 or 6 years, but probably, maybe longer.
I've been overseas full time for the last 2 years and done about 16, 17 countries now in the last couple of years. But even before that, I always make sure I get away for 2 months every year and just travel. Like, the whole reason I built a passive income was to travel. So if I ever get swept up in work just trying to make more money from being a buyer's agent, what was the point of grafting for that 10 years personally to get the passive income?
Yep. And you're also a structural mechanical engineer. So this has been a very long-winded intro, but you know who Steve Palise is. So first off, we normally like to ask people what their first purchase was and all that sort of good stuff. But we've asked you that a couple of times. So we'll ask you something similar. So what I'm going to ask you is for a bit of a wrap around the commercial property market. So tell us, Palise, and some people have asked the questions as well. So
because I want to frame this. I want to frame another bit of a slightly different question. That person was talking about Crestmead, right? Like, do you think about commercial property as the same way as selecting locations as you do in residential, right? Like, it's very, area specific and location specific, and when someone says, "Oh, should I buy in Crestmead?" Is that something that they should? Oh, I should buy residential. Hey, I should buy commercial, or how do you kind of think about? Sorry,
good question. So, like, there's a couple aspects of that. The first one is you still want to buy to the fundamentals. So you still want to have like the population growth and the infrastructure spending and the short days on market and the scarcity type of thing. Weirdly, the residential market affects the commercial market as well, and probably not how you thought. So, like, say you've got the perfect residential area where you're like, okay, this $700,000 house is going to double in the next 7-8 years to 1.4 mil. If that area is growing, there's got to be a reason why that's growing. So that's either undersupply of stock, or population's growing, or there's some demand of where it's not priced well enough. Commercial sort of gets a flow-on effect, kind of like the ripple effect. Like, you don't have a $1.4 million house, well, a 700K one go to 1.4 mil, and the 500K warehouse stay at 500K, because then everyone in the $1.4 million house looks at that 500K warehouse and goes, why am I buying residential when I can get 3 times the rent from a property that's a third the price? And then that gets a bit of growth there. There's more to it with growth with commercial, because it's obviously got to do with like vacancy rates and what you supply in the area and all that type of stuff. Even types of commercial are going to change. Like, that statement's probably true for like industrial. Very true for retail if you buy in the right spot. If you go like in a retail strip and they build a high-rise apartment with 1,000 people in it, that's going to benefit obviously the cafe and the hairdresser and the medical center. Office space, probably not as much. That's more about where people are willing to commute to for work and less about the residential market in the area. Like, most people go into some form of major CBD. They're not going in suburbia to kind of buy their office space. So there is a flow on from residential to commercial, if that's what you're asking.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. It's a good way to look at it. So if you are thinking about looking at doing commercial by yourself, it's not always the worst idea to look in the areas where you see fundamentally from a resi perspective, but there's a lot more to it, right? There's a lot more to it.
Yeah, and it's not always the same as well, because most, like, especially if we're going like in industrial, they're normally in their own complexes as well. Yeah. So it's not so much the streets of residential that you're going to be focusing on. You'll look at the surrounding suburbs, because the surrounding suburbs is what's going to drive the demand. Like, you need a warehouse for car mechanics, spray painters, wholesalers, distributors, storage. Like, you've got all that part of it, which is basically the fundamental demand comes from people. So that comes from there. Different warehouses, complexes will serve different purposes though. Like one that's near the airport will most likely be distribution. One that's surrounded by residential will be service-based businesses like the car mechanics, spray painters, kitchen fabricators, stuff like that. And then one that's like slightly on the outskirts of a city near a major regional highway will be freight. Like, so they all serve different purposes. But if you're in middle ring, capital city, and it's an industrial complex next to a main kind of regional residential suburb, it probably will be serving that suburb unless it's next to one of those kind of freight type ones.
Love it. That makes perfect sense. Love it.
Yeah.
Okay, round the grounds. Let's hear about Australia. What's it looking like in the commercial space?
Yeah. All right. So I'll mainly talk about industrial because that's sort of like what 80% of people buy. Retail, it's got more to do with like foot traffic, road traffic, where you're buying. There are macro data for retail if you want to look at like what the Westfields are doing and all that stuff, but 99% of people watching this can't afford a Westfield, so that means stuff all. They've got to look at like local foot traffic, road traffic. Office space is tied in a little bit.
Palise, just before you get into it, the Mac is just down the road from me, sold for, I think this was 5.7 million. And I was like, it's not even wasn't even a big Macca's.
Yeah, that's where it is. It's probably not that expensive in the grand scheme of the houses around it. I'd be interested to see what the yields are. I'm not.
The houses are not $3 or $4 million around here.
It's not about that.
Yeah, it's not about that. It's about the return. But like that'll probably have sold for between a 3-4% net yield.
Yeah, exactly. Because I heard it on Toddy Sloan's podcast, and he was saying it sold for below, I think, 0.5% below the cash rate. And I was like, wow. Why people those upper end ones, people who normally just using it to park their money securely, like they're not trusting banks and they don't want to put in shares. It's the same as like the Bunnings and that. You can get like 5.5% if you buy a regional McDonald's, but then you got to balance the capital growth factor. Same thing for Joe's question. The residential market will dictate how much that's going to grow. That's not going to double in price unless the residential market doubles in price because it's based on that community. Whereas like the capital city ones, that's just parking money around. But round the grounds. So office space, most capital cities, the vacancy rates are between 10 and 15%. In the last year, all of them, weirdly enough, I think it was Perth and Adelaide, vacancy rates actually tightened, surprisingly. So there's a bit more going back to work culture in those areas. But just generally, you guys know I don't really like office space. It's kind of like buying a high density apartment where you don't own anything. You just got a bit of sky space. But in terms of yields, this is what most people will kind of want and probably why you asked the question. Yields have come back fairly strong in the last 6 months. So where we were buying 5% yields a year and a half ago in certain locations, they're now 5.5%, 6%. So we've seen about a percent bounce back. So most of the stuff I'm buying at the moment in Brisbane and Perth, we're buying between 6.5% net yields. Sydney getting 5s in front of it, which is quite good. So I bought a few on like the Northern Beaches, where we got like a 5.2, 5.4% there. Is this office space?
No, industrial. I'm just going to talk industrial because that's the bulk of what people buy. Adelaide and Canberra, we're getting about 5.5 to 6% net yields, which is quite strong. And just in case the listeners don't know, you don't pay stamp duty in ACT and South Australia. So that's a nice little kicker, saving yourself.
How much is stamp duty in the other states? Like just in general, like how much are you saving there?
3.3, 3.4%. So it's significant in regards to your leverage, because obviously having an extra 3.4% cash, if you can leverage that at 80%, cool. That's not a bad little extra 100K or 200K you can leverage. But like you buy $1 million property, that's 34 grand you're saving effectively. So it's not chump change.
What's the reason for that anyway? Do you know? I mean, I don't know why.
It's all government nonsense about crown leases and stuff like that. So you don't own the land there like you do like in Sydney, for instance. Like the government's theoretically got like you basically have a long-term lease over the land.
99 year one, is that what the crown?
It's like that. Yeah. But it's a forever one. They're never going to take it from you, kind of thing. However, don't buy. I get literally every second phone call as people say they want to buy there because they're going to save on stamp duty. It's a good addition, but it's not a reason you should be buying a 30-year property. Like it's in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't matter. You're also getting less yield there. So if you want to argue Brisbane versus there, a 6.5% versus a 5.5, you'll make up that difference in a couple of years just with cash flow anyway. So it'll come out in the wash. So 5.5%, Canberra and Adelaide. Picking up a bit in Hobart as well. It's a bit of a weird market there because it's a very small / big city. Like it's a country town, but it's in terms of population, it's not that big. So like that varies. You can buy 15 minutes out of Hobart and get 6.2%, or you can buy in the thick of it and buy 4.5%. So buy there. Melbourne, I haven't bought for about 6 months. The yields are absolutely terrible. And by terrible, I just mean low. Like we're talking like 4% net yield. So really soft there.
Nobody likes Melbourne these days. Nobody likes Victoria. It's just like
Melbourne's
just cut it out
Jeff
of trade.
Jeff is bullish on. Every time I talk to Jeff, he's like Melbourne's my. I love Melbourne. it's the underdog right now. The government, Dan Andrews is tearing the place apart. It's the perfect time to buy.
There might be opportunity where other people aren't looking. That's where you kind of make opportunity. So there might be really good opportunity for like a value add and things like that. Darwin don't really buy. Regional towns with commercial, you can have some fun there because you get better bang for buck. You can get a better yield. And like, instead of buying a single warehouse, you can buy like a whole warehouse complex and that. But vacancy rates generally are higher in regional towns. So it just depends there. So what I was going to say. So in terms of the market, in terms of macro data, industrial rates are all-time low still. So I think last time we spoke about, was it 3 months ago? We're about 0.5% vacancy rates. Most capital cities are between 0.2 and 0.3% vacancy rates now. So when people say commercial is going to crash, okay, vacancy rate's a very good indicator about demand because it shows how many people are looking to rent that space. 0.2% is a pretty tight vacancy rate for me, considering 5 years ago I was telling people 5% is a tight vacancy rate. So vacancy rate's really strong. Unemployment's still really low. Rental increases are all-time high. We saw 15 to 30% on average in most capital cities last year. So everything's strong. Interest rates are high, and this is the biggest argument I have with people. They go, interest rates are high. All these other factors good. Should I be buying now or waiting for an opportunity for the market to crash? I personally don't think the market's going to crash because the fundamentals are strong. And the only reason interest rates are high is to stop the market going through the roof. So I can't see kind of a big crash coming. There's two scenarios I can see that's going to play out. So I know I'm rambling a little bit. First one is because of the tight vacancy rates, we keep seeing rental increases. So with inflation at 7.8%, let's just say we get that 8% for the next few years, rental increases, which is good for the rent. That'll be really good for the yield because it'll bring the yield up from, say, 6% up to 6.2, 6.4% if you're buying a 6% yield. And then interest rates come down. And that's where you're really going to capitalize because you've won on both fronts. You've bought at a good yield and the cash flow is just getting it stronger and stronger and stronger. That's what I'm hoping for my clients and my personal portfolio. What could happen is rents stop in the next year because we see some form of recession that people are talking about. And then interest rates climb a little bit more. So that's what some commentators are like, don't buy commercial. If interest rates go up and we stop seeing rental increases, we'll see a softening of the market, which they're true. Like the price might drop by 5 or 10%. But as I've said on every single one of these sessions, why are you trying to pick the market to 6 months? You're buying it for 20 years. Just buy with that 10, 20 year mindset of, okay, is this going to be a good property in 10 years time?
Yeah.
Once you're educated, once you got the funds, have a crack.
Yeah. And it's such a good point. It's like, what are you going to, you're holding this thing for, as you say, 30 years. And would you rather have a great, like under market value, right? Hey, I can get this thing, $20,000 under market, but it's a terrible 30-year location. Yeah. Or I can, get fair market value in this good location that's going to go gangbusters in 10, 15, 20 years. Which would you rather? Save $20,000 now and then suffer for the rest of time, or have a great location that's going to do well?
Jesus, sounds a bit suffering for all eternity, Joe. The rest of the time, no. Oh. I agree. There's got to be that sort of trade off between if you're getting a discount like this. Sorry, man.
Yeah, I'm no good at the trade-off, though. I'm terrible at saying, oh, well, I'll just walk away.
You want a discount? You want a discount now? You want a discount? No, but it's interesting because I get emails from parts of regional Victoria about sort of reductions of prices, and it just sort of tells me that maybe that's not a market I want to be looking at the moment. If I'm getting emails every couple of days about a location telling me that they having to continuously drop the price to sell stock, maybe that's not an area I should be considering if it doesn't have that sort of demand at the moment. And how long will it be before it has any demand? But yeah,
but then also it's like, why? Sorry, Steve. I know we're interviewing you, but why buy in a market that's going to give you 3%, 4% growth? Cash flow, when you can get a 5%, 6% growth cash flow in another market that's doing better. Like, why not?
It's the same argument that every resi investor has, and you guys have probably had 1,000 chats on this kind of live sessions about the cash flow versus capital growth argument. It's the same thing with commercial. And that's why the person buying the McDonald's, Jeff, you mentioned before, probably thinks it's a good capital growth plan. They're not that fussed about the cash flow, and why you'll get like some commercial buyers.
Definitely good capital growth. There's Mac is doing a roaring trade down there for sure.
Yeah, like some buyers agents in the commercial space will go out and buy in like little 20,000 person towns in the Rockhamptons and Townsvilles and stuff like that. And they'll be like, oh, look, we got a 7.2% net yield. And it looks great on social media. 7.2% net yield, fresh 3-year lease. But what they're not saying is vacancy rates are like 1 to 3 years potentially in that area. So even though it looks good on paper now, in a few years' time, it might be a terrible investment. Whereas what's better, buying like a 6% yielding one in Brisbane, where vacancy rates are like 0.2% and you fill it in literally a week or two, and you get good capital growth, you get good rental increases, and you don't have to worry about those long periods of vacancy. I'd argue you'd get a much better return on investment with something like that, but it doesn't look anywhere near as attractive in terms of cash flow. So it's the same argument with commercial as residential. As you guys know, I'm a low risk guy. I just want to be able to sleep at night, steady performer, do my graphs and see on Jordan's game plans. Cool. In 10 years' time, there's a nice linear line of that's where I'm going to be.
Are you sleeping at night at the moment, Palise? I mean,
actually, no, yeah, Bob's sleeping good now. We're actually like getting 2, 3, 4 hour stints. So it's pretty good. Yeah, she slept through the night the first time ever a couple of days ago.
Side point. I feel like you've gotten on a bit of a soapbox. You got your soapbox. This is as much of a box of soap you've ever jumped on, I think. So, but let's crack on to why you shouldn't buy commercial property. What is the first, in no particular order? We're gonna do this sort of just.
There's a good analogy. That was good, Jeff. That was funny.
Thank you. No, well done. So the first reason why people shouldn't buy commercial property, and I want to hear people's reason. So is that you're early on in your portfolio? Do you agree or do you disagree with this? But Palise, what are your thoughts on this?
All right. Well, I wrote that point, so hopefully I've got a good point about it. So, all right, you're too early on in your portfolio, and what I mean by that is the whole benefit of property is leverage. So I'm actually I'm one of those people that I actually don't love property. Like I don't give a shit about some timber struts and some concrete tilt-up panels and stuff like that. For me, it's the leverage. I like that the banks will come and give me 90% or 80% of my borrowing. So I get to play with big numbers, which also means you can lose big numbers if you don't know what you're doing. So let's not sugarcoat it, but I get to play with it. So one of the negatives and why you shouldn't buy commercial is if you're really early on and you don't have a portfolio yet, your job, if you're in accumulation stage and your focus is growth because you want to get as much equity as you can to buy the next one, buying residential makes more sense. I would much rather go buy 3 residential properties on a 90% loan and pay lenders mortgage insurance than 1 commercial on a 70% loan, because I'm going to have 3 times the asset. And if I get the same capital growth, even though commercial can theoretically grow the same as residential, I'm going to have 3 times more equity, which gives me 3 times more options. I can sell down and transfer, pull out that equity, and then buy a commercial the same size as I would have originally. It just gives you more options. So if you're really early on, use leverage to your advantage, at least till you get up to your serviceability issues, and then kind of go from there. So that's the point about too early on in your portfolio. It's nothing to do with age. It's all about to maximize leveraging.
Okay. Well, there's a really good question that came up, and it's a long one, so I'll read it out pretty quickly. But it talks to this point, so that's why I wanted to bring it up now. So it says, I've typically read and been advised to build a portfolio with residential when starting out, and then moving to commercial during the consolidation phase nearing retirement. However, I've read your book and see many upsides to commercial. He loves commercial. He's sold. Can you speak to the typical advice of why you shouldn't just start there? Start your journey with commercial early on to reach your financial goals. I guess that kind of talks.
Disclaimer up, Joe.
Well, yeah, we've popped it up before. We can pop it up again, but
right.
but I mean, that's kind of talking to what you're talking about there, Steve.
Yeah. So one of the points later on, I think number 3 point we go through is actually it does not suit your goals. So that's going to kind of tie in with that a little bit. But like commercial is, if you get it right, it's a really good performer. Like you get good capital growth, you get awesome cash flow, it ticks the boxes. But then there's lots of negatives, which we're going to break down today about higher risk and more moving parts, and finance is a different game and things like that. But the bigger deposits is probably the main one. Not a lot of people when they're starting a portfolio, and this is why most people say build a resi portfolio first. And for that exact point, number one, you're early on, you don't have leverage. Not many people, say you want to buy $1 million commercial and you need a 30% deposit, 5% purchasing cost. It's 350 grand. Like not a lot of young 21-year-olds have that, but they can save 50 grand and get a 90% loan and get into kind of like a 400, 500, 600K residential property. So that's what I meant by you're too early on in your portfolio. If you got the cash, like say you get inheritance, for instance, and it's a big lump sum of cash, and you know with that inheritance, you wouldn't be able to borrow past a certain serviceability limit, i.e. like you get given $1 million, but you're earning 60 grand a year. The banks probably aren't going to lend to you any more than 300, 400 grand extra because of serviceability. Cool. Commercial makes way more sense. Get the cash flow, get the capital growth because you're not limited by the capital, which is actually point number 2. So we can probably flow into that unless we've got some more points to talk about there.
I just wanted to tell people that, yes, we are definitely still uploading these, Jack. If you want to subscribe and have a look at our YouTube, there it is. Actually, I
feel like Palise was on a roll there, and you just...
I wrecked him. Sorry, Palise. So the point number 2, mate, you're on fire. Tell it to us, and I'll get it up on the spiel.
Right. Number 2 is you do not have the required capital, or it suits your borrowing capacity. So that's sort of what I was kind of going towards with that comment of.
I mean, I started my portfolio with I think it was like $30,000 or something like that, using a guarantor loan. Like I didn't have $300,000 to throw at property to be able to buy a commercial property in the first place. I had to build my asset base and do renovations and subdivisions and those type of things to be able to actually get enough capital. And still, I don't feel like I'm in a position, even where I'm at right now, to be like, you know what, commercials where it's at for me. I'm still not there just yet in my journey, at least. But what happens if someone's young and does have $500,000? Like, does that fundamentally change the question for you?
Yeah.
Or change
the
answer?
Your case is exactly the same as me, Joe. I bought a house in Blacktown for my first one for 230 grand on a 90% loan. So I needed about 30 grand to get into it. Then my next property, I bought on a 95% loan with the equity from the growth of the first one. So all of a sudden, with 15% deposit, I'd got into 2 properties effectively. So that's a game changer. But to answer your question, if you do have the cash, commercial is a good option, assuming you're educated. Like I'm going to keep saying this 1,000 times on this live. You need to understand it. If you don't know what you're doing, you're playing with big numbers, you're burning yourself with big numbers. So you want to make sure you kind of cross the T's, dot the I's. I've got all the due diligence reports and checklists and all that stuff you can download for free. It's all free information, but just make sure you kind of cross the T's, dot the I's there. But that's sort of like the most bottleneck for people is getting the deposit. The argument is commercial is more expensive as well, so therefore it's harder to get into. That's a little bit of a myth because you can buy, like we've bought maybe 2 or 3 properties sub 200K in the last month or 2, just little warehouses on the fringe of Brisbane and Perth and stuff like that.
What are your thoughts on those sort of assets though? The 200K ones, like I just don't like. What's the why would somebody buy? I mean, aside from they just have a lower deposit, but what is the prospect? What is the purpose of buying that lower value asset in commercial?
So surprisingly, you actually get the same capital growth as a slightly bigger one. Like a
Same
500K one will grow. Yeah, percentage-wise, it grows the same. Less money into it. The advantage is because you got less money into it, you could theoretically buy more of them. So you could buy 3 or 4 lower priced ones and have lots of tenants. So that way you get a bit more of a linear line with your tenants. You don't have like full occupancy, then it drops off and then it comes back to full. So you get to diversify asset class, the location, who the tenants are, when the leases finish. So that all sounds positive. The negatives with the small ones is it's going to be a pretty bad tenant. It's going to be an average Joe, no offense. And then they're going to sign like a 12-month lease or 24-month lease. You're not going to get a small one like that where they sign a 5-10-year lease. Good. This is exactly the point I'm going into. They also turn over more often because small businesses go one or two ways quickly. They either grow and outgrow the space or they close up shop. So you can expect on those really cheapies a new tenant every 3-4 years. The good thing is the vacancy rates are tight. So you get a new tenant pretty quickly. So it's not a huge deal, but you'll pay your property manager leasing fees, which is generally like 15-20% in the first year. So that'll erode the debt a little bit there. But then it's just like a bigger one, you'll get a bigger tenant, a longer lease. But the other thing is finance as well. If you are one of the investors that's going the lease stock loan, that's not going to be applicable because a lease stock loan is based on the strength of a lease. So you need to find a property with a 3, 4, 5-year lease. That's not going to be it. So that's just for full doc people or maybe a cashy job or something like that. But they're all right. I've got a few of them in my portfolio. But like I said, the tenants always turn over. They always cry poor. And then the ones that are really good that pay on time, they end up disappearing in a couple of years because they've got to upsize the warehouse space.
Yeah.
Anyway.
How's that?
That's
how's
the
that
worst.
Ipswich,
That's the worst part as well.
How's that Ipswich property going?
Ipswich is actually really good. I actually just the tenant actually. So I got a cafe in Ipswich. Tenant gave me notice about 6 months ago. There's about 6 months left that he's leaving, and now I've got like a convenience store going in before the lease is even finished. And paying what I get now. Bought that for $440. I'm getting 38 grand a year rent now. And I rent out 10 car spots because it's a freestanding site, and that gives me an extra 5-6 grand.
Is that $20 a week, is it?
It's a nice little cash flow king. I thought normally with like retail, especially freestanding retail, vacancy periods are really long because you need to wait for like a new tenant. They've got to be a business that's going to fit out costs and incentives and all that. So I got it filled really quickly. So that was a good one. I was budgeting about 12-24 months vacancy.
Wow. Well, that's an 8.6% gross yield.
Yeah. So
yeah.
Oh, net yield.
Net, Joe. Net.
We're talking commercial now. So, have you finished on number 2, or
what do we got? So it was like you don't have the capital. Oh no, I haven't actually. So
okay, jeez, all right.
So I want to touch on it doesn't suit your borrowing capacities. So what I mean by this is everyone has a different borrowing capacity for residential and commercial. Sometimes it's the same, but personal circumstances change it quite a lot. So what I mean by that is, say you're a first-time investor, you don't have a portfolio, because you can get higher LVRs with residential, it's likely you'll have a bigger borrowing capacity. You might have like 1.5 mil serviceability for residential, but you've only got $1 million for commercial, and that's because it's dependent on your capital. Like you might only have like 200K capital, so that's kind of limiting your commercial because of the high LVRs. But you can stretch it further with residential. So that if you're looking for a strategy of growing a big portfolio, maximizing leveraging is a better option. In saying that though, some people actually have the opposite. Some people have a way much larger commercial capacity because it's better for serviceability and they've got access to lease stock loans and that. I've got a client who had barely any residential capacity and we bought him a 3 mil commercial. So you get
how does that work? What happened
there? Because he couldn't get a lease stock loan. He had all the funds there, but the banks wouldn't lend to him anymore because he's got the funding. So he works for himself. So he got a lease stock loan for 3 mil. So that no matter what his strategy would have been, commercial makes more sense. So like that's where that comes into play. So if you are thinking about commercial, talk to your broker, again, make sure they're commercial mortgage broker and they know what they're doing.
Yeah. So how do we find that out? How do you, because that's one thing. Like if I go to the standard residential if I walk into Rams Home Loans, they're not gonna do the commercial stuff. Like how do I get a commercial savvy broker?
You ask for referrals, and I think we've had a few chats in Ozprop about it. There's about 5 or 6 in Ozprop I highly recommend that are all there.
Nick Wilcox, we had him on a session with you, Palise.
Nick Wilcox, Victor Lagos, who the other main ones were. There's what's his name? I got to mention.
If you can't remember them.
There's four or five in there that are all really good, and I've worked with 10 plus times each. So just reach out to those guys, or reach out to me, and I'll make an introduction. That's fine as well. But I think we did there's a post about commercial brokers. I'll dig it up and post it again.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah. Okay, but does that make sense, guys? So it's like that one's where you can have the best strategy in the world, but if your borrowing capacities dictate something different, you might have to skew down a different path.
So one of the questions I've got is, I'm equity rich and cash poor, right? Like, let's just throw this scenario out for a fictitious person. I've been sitting on my PPOR, I have a couple of investment properties, I've got a lot of equity, but my salary is not that big. I can't borrow anything because the banks won't allow me. Can I then go to a commercial broker and say, like, hey, can I borrow commercial? And they'll say, yeah, actually you can, because you've got a large amount of equity here, and we're just going to look at the lease on the property and use a lease doc loan, and you can then, is that what happened with your business owner person there?
Somewhat true. For that case scenario, though, you're still relying on the fact you've got serviceability to pull those funds out. So like an example will be, say you've got $1 million portfolio and a $500,000 debt on that portfolio, but you've only I've only got an extra $500,000 serviceability. So theoretically, I could pull out that 500 grand, but the banks are saying you can't buy anything more than that anyway. So I'd have to pull it out and basically buy it like as a cash, like line of credit. So you still need the serviceability to be able to get those deposits out, but the extra 70, 80% that you can use that kind of equity draw to buy another property, the banks are saying no for residential. That situation, perfect. If you can get that as a line of credit and you're telling them you're using it for a property, because the banks want to know what you're using it for. You can't just pull out equity and be like, oh, I'm going to go buy a boat. They want to see that you're buying an investment. That's the perfect situation. Or most of my clients actually have, like, in their home loan, they've actually got it in an offset facility. So the cash is there. They've pulled it out at some point, but they still don't have serviceability. So then you can use it there. But I just want to reiterate, you might actually have a better serviceability for a full doc loan with a commercial anyway, because it is a higher cash flow. Because when brokers do your serviceability assessment, they put in assumptions. They put in what you're buying, where you're buying, what the yield is. So like you can have a different serviceability if you're buying a high yielding Brisbane house versus a 2.5% yielding Sydney property as well. So basically what the banks do, it's called like shading. They'll do principal and interest, even if you're on interest-only loans. They'll add their bank's buffer onto the interest rate, whether it be
1.5 at the moment, unless you're in
3.5%, depending on what tier lender. They take 80% of the rent only, so they take 20% of the rent away, and they make sure you can afford that. So even like a neutrally geared property, you do that criteria, might go, let's say 20 grand a year negative. So cool. If you have 2 or 3 of those, most people can't afford 60 grand out of pocket a year in addition to their home loan. That caps you. But if you're buying a commercial that's, say, 20 grand a year positive, and you do that criteria, that might actually mean you got more affordability, because it just brings it back to neutral or slightly negative. So you might be able to squeeze a little bit more out with commercial, even with full doc. But like I said, have a chat with the brokers. I can talk about this, but it means nothing until you've actually run your numbers yourself.
Well, one of the questions I have, which is probably a better question for Nick Wilcox, so we might have to get him on again. But the question is around, okay, so I'm tapped out of my serviceability, but I can borrow to buy a commercial property. That commercial, the biggest challenge that I have in my residential portfolio is I don't have enough cash flow. So when I add the commercial property, you're giving me a 5%, 6%, 7% net yield, which is giving me more serviceability and income. So that then could buying a commercial property open up my serviceability to be then buying a residential property?
Yes, but not to the extent you're thinking. So, like, I'll keep using $1 million example just so it's a nice round number. People can halve it or they can double or whatever.
Yep.
Say you bought $1 million property and it's 20 grand a year positive. So you've got this nice little commercial, good tenant, it's 20 grand a year cash flow positive. The banks are still doing that servicing criteria on that. So, like, in their eyes, even though you're 20 grand a year positive, it's probably neutral or negative. So it's not adding to it as much as you can. Even if you didn't put that servicing criteria onto it, it'd be like you getting a pay rise. Well, Jeff, getting a pay rise at work and the boss paying you 20 grand a year, that all of a sudden doesn't change your borrowing capacity drastically. Like maximum, 5 times, you might have an extra 100 grand up your sleeve. That's not groundbreaking. So I know what you're getting at, Joe. It's not a fairy tale thing where all of a sudden I'm getting this rent, I'm going to have a huge borrowing capacity. No, it doesn't take away the same as residential is probably the best way of explaining it.
No,
there we go.
Solid. Thank you, mate.
Let's move on to number 3, because otherwise we still got even the types of properties red flags. So we've got so much content, and it does not suit your goals. So why is this the reason we shouldn't buy commercial property?
All right, so this is probably the most important one for most people after the first two. Your goals, it's basically your plan. So it's what you're trying to achieve over what time frame. And then you normally marry that up with what you've got to work with. And what I mean by that is your finance. Like, how much finance do I have to work with? Everyone's got a different purpose with property. So, like, if I get an 18-year-old Ausprop investor client, his goals, I know he might say, oh, you want to step away from work and travel the world instantly. I know that's not going to happen.
Started working yet. Jesus.
But that's the thing. He's going to be working for the next 10 years. So it's not about that. It's about building wealth for him. Whereas inversely, a lot of my clients are 55, 60 years old. So we're actually talking about passive incomes from retirement. So me going out, even if they've got a huge serviceability, like the number 2 point we talked about with borrowing capacities, even if they've got $3 million worth of residential capacity, me going out buying them negatively geared residential properties, how does that help their retirement? Their goal is to have a passive income for retirement. So we're going commercial no matter what with them. So my job with that is buy as low risk commercial as I can that guarantees them to have a passive income. So most people in that spectrum in between that, they're kind of in a balance between they might have a property or two in this group. They're trying to work out, okay, are we going to have a passive income in 5 years' time, 10 years' time? But that's what I mean about your goals. What you're actually trying to achieve over what time frame. People are different. I get a lot of clients that I actually buy residential for, and they don't give a crap about cash flow. They're literally buying it to pay it off in 20 years and give to their kids. It's a legacy thing for them. So cash flow has nothing to do with it. Then you get other people that are exact opposite. They want to just have the best retirement they can. So it just depends on what you're trying to achieve. And I really like Joe's post the other day where he actually broke down his strategy and what he's actually trying to achieve and what time frame, because that's what you should be doing.
You got some good compliments, and I was throwing shade saying Chat GPT. But no, so when you one thing you mentioned there that I wanted to pull the thread on, you said there's the actions as well. You said low risk commercial. What are some characteristics of low risk commercial property?
Low risk, really long lease if you can get it, because that obviously gives, assuming you've got the guarantees on the lease. So like personal guarantees, bank guarantees, good bonds. Obviously the tenant's really strong. But the biggest low risk one for me is stupidly tight vacancy rates. So find an area where there's pretty much stuff all vacant properties and versatile premises. I wouldn't go specialized where if you lose that tenant, you're going to be stuffed for 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. And that's why I like suburban retail, industrial, the stuff that doesn't matter if they leave, there's always some other form of tenant that can kind of come in. But like, all right, so I know I was like sort of bad mouthing some regional towns previously. That might be really good for a retail one. So bang for buck, like I've bought into and before I bought a shopping strip in Townsville. So even though I sort of said, look, vacancy rates are really high for industrial, don't go there. We bought, I think it was 2.2 mil. We got 12 tenants. So arguably we might say
that's diversifying.
We might say you're not having good capital growth there. I don't care, but that client didn't care. They just wanted the low risk. So even if he lost 1 or 2 of the tenants, it's not going to ruin him financially. He's still got enough kind of money ticking through. So that might be a low risk one. Or looking at a pet barn at the moment, and that's got a fresh 10-year lease, stuff like that, where it's like a blue chip tenant, long lease. I know I've kind of gone skewed off different options for you to answer your question, but yeah, just as stable tenant as you can, long-term tenant as you can, or a versatile, tightly held region as you can.
So also when you look at tenants and think about tenants, how do you kind of, this is like a pet barn to me, is it a blue chip or is it not a blue chip? How do you kind of classify a tenant as blue chip or other color chip?
This is the fun and the annoying thing with commercials, because everyone's got a different opinion. Like, I don't really buy petrol stations. I've bought a couple of them in the past because we got like a BWS and a Woolworths and stuff with it. I don't like them because I don't think they're going to be around in 20, 30 years time. And there's risk of land contamination. Some of my clients don't care. They're like, nah, cars are never going away. We're always going to need petrol and diesel, don't care kind of thing. And that's a personal opinion. There's no right answer. They're allowed a different opinion to me. We might actually touch on that. We'll touch on that on the end, Joe, because on the end, we're going to go through like red flags with properties. So that might be a good question for them.
Dokes.
Yeah.
Well, I'm for it.
Should we? Have you done
how many have we got?
Your goals, Palise?
There's 5. So this is the last.
No, I'm just wondering. I didn't want to rush. I don't want to rush you, Palise. It
No, you're right.
does not suit your risk profile. What is the difference between risk profile and goals? Like, doesn't risk profile form part of your goals, or are you're trying to swifty us with? Yeah, no, fair enough.
No, you're sort of right. Like, but your goals could theoretically be different to your risk. Like, you can take on a lot of risk. You can have big goals and take on a lot of risk, but it might not suit you. And like the example, like commercial is you need bigger buffers, bigger deposits. There's more skin in the game. Like, it is high risk. Like, I don't sugarcoat commercial. It's high risk. You need to know what you're doing. But like an example would be, and I say I've got a mum and dad investor and they've got 3 kids. And even though they've got the capital to be able to buy a commercial property, I would recommend them have bigger buffers than someone who's got like the bank of mum and dad to fall back on, or a spare $1 million in the bank. Because if the property goes vacant or interest rates rise, they need to be able to handle it. So even though they've got the capacity for it, that would be one where I say, look, this doesn't suit your risk profile. Go buy a nice high-yielding residential, or we'd strip back their max capacity to make sure there's enough buffer there. So you do need to take into account your personal financial situations, and you can flash up that little financial advice thing again if you need. I think Joe's doing it.
He's ready. He's ready to go.
Yeah. So yeah, you got to make sure you got buffers. So everyone should stress test their portfolio. Look at really high interest rates. Look at what happens if there's vacancies. Look what happens if you lose your job. Look at what happens if you knock your partner up, or like you get another kid, or circumstances change, because that's unexpected costs. You need to buffer those, and everyone's kind of different stage of their life. We sort of mentioned before, like an older investor, they've got the capital and they've got the buffers, but they don't have the time. Their risk is time. We can't get it wrong because of that. I can get something slightly wrong for a younger client because it'll make up long term with the time, but that has to be bulletproof, because they don't want to go into retirement to then have to go back to work. And that's sort of what I mean by get your risk profile. It's outside of borrowing capacities. It's about financial kind of well-being.
How often do people come to you and they've sort of got these like really high and lofty goals, like they want to be financially free in 5 years or whatever it is, but then their risk profile just says, well, no, I don't want to. They just don't. Is an incompatibility there. Do you often find that? I'm just out of curiosity, and how do you combat that incompatibility with somebody's goals versus their risk profile?
I'm pretty like to the point. So like I always just use spreadsheets. So like when I'm going through like a property plan, or actually looking at the cash flow property, I show them the stress test. I don't just say, look, this is all rosy. I say, look, what interest rate can you actually afford here? Like, how much supplementary income do you have? How much buffers? Everyone's in control of their own financial future though. And even though someone might be a higher risk, as long as they're aware of the risk, they might actually take it on. Like I took on huge amounts of risk when I was accumulating, to the point where I had to ask like dad occasionally for $2-3 grand because I couldn't afford when the hot water system went and things like that. But I knew I had that safety net. I didn't have kids. I could always go back home and sleep in my old bedroom. Like, that was me calculating my risk profile there. So you just stress test. And the question's probably, how much should you stress test? That I don't have the answer to. I personally do 3% higher.
You haven't worked it out yet.
I do 3%
later awake
pay
at night. Thought how much I need to stress test this 10 times, or
Yeah, but you can also
Yeah, but
go
how?
down to,
Yeah,
like,
that's a
you can
good
go
that's a good question. Is how do you stress test? Like, what is stress testing, and what does it actually look like?
Yeah. For residential, it's a little bit easier because if you know like vacancy rates, you can kind of buffer for typical maintenance costs. And you might have a blowout where the roof, I don't know, has some damage and you're up for $5,000 here and there, but you can sort of set buffers in place there. Commercial, it's the unknown with vacancy rates. I can do the best analysis and vacancy study in the world, but circumstances change. Like COVID, for instance, might happen, and you might have owned a CrossFit gym and that all of a sudden closed for 6 months. So even though I might have bought you an area with a 1 month vacancy rate, you need to be able to afford 6 months of no income coming in on that property. And the banks did help out a little bit because you could cut interest repayments and stuff like that. But that's where it up. But me personally, I do 3% extra interest rate on what I'm seeing at the moment. I'm okay now because I'm an established investor. So my cash flow my buffer is quite huge. So, but when I was kind of grafting a little bit harder on the borderline, 3%. And then with commercial, I'll generally double what I think the vacancy rate is. So if I find a property that's like 3-4 months vacancy period, I'll probably allow 8 months to 12 months worth of interest repayments to make sure I can handle that and then go from there. But there's not as many maintenance costs and things like that with commercial.
So what kind of percentage should we be thinking about for our buffer? We had Jeremy in Azella, who's the accountant for he's a
my
great accountant. He's everyone's accountant, this guy. But he's very good at what he does. And he said he needs a 10% buffer. Like that's his kind of rule for residential. Now, I think that's very aggressive in the accumulation phase. But in the commercial space, how do you think about it as a percentage? Or I know you broke it down just then pretty well, but have you got a percentage that we should think about?
No, I don't think people should have a percentage. He's doing it as a nice blanket statement for all his clients, which is good, but everyone's different. Like if you can find me someone who's got a huge portfolio that didn't take on tremendous amount of risk early on, like I was sleeping in the dodgiest share house I could find because it was $150 a week rent while I was grafting. So it just depends. But if I had like Raya, who you met before, my little one, different risk profile completely. That is, I need to make sure I can pay, look after them, keep all the mortgages sorted. So just assess it yourself. Like look at your portfolio, break down each risk on each style of property. Like a resi is different risk to commercial. And then look there. Where it gets, I'll keep it commercial based because we've had enough chat about resi and other lives. Look at how many you have as well, because you can de-risk by having multiple properties. So if I've got like 5 different commercials in different locations and all the leases are ending at different times, I don't have to have a buffer for each property. I only need the buffer for the next one that's coming up in case it goes vacant. So I can have 5 properties, but 1 buffer. And that's the way you get around kind of having huge buffers there. But to answer your question, Joe, no, there's no right answer. Work it out yourself. Go speak with a financial advisor or a good accountant and look at your own circumstances and what you're trying to achieve because everyone's different.
Somebody asked you, Joe, 10% of, I think for Jeremy, that was 10% of the property value, wasn't it? So it was like a 500K, he had a 50K buffer, didn't he?
Yeah, that's kind of, for me, that's why it's a little bit crazy it's crazy. It's very protective. Because if you have a $6 million portfolio, that's $600,000 of capital that you need to have. So I don't know, but it's good to have something. You definitely need to have a buffer. The way I like to think about it is having
you're saying 600K is a lot, but you do need a bigger buffer for a bigger portfolio because you are more susceptible. If interest rates are a percentage, they're not a fixed cost. So you should have a lot more buffer if you do have a big portfolio.
Yeah, absolutely. But I don't think it scales at 10% each time. I think it's kind of like yields, right? At the lower value properties, the yield is quite high, but as you start to climb in value, the yields start to drop off. I think it works out kind of like that.
I think the best thing is to consider a balance between your debt risk and your like cash flow kind of money coming in, because obviously like if I've got $1 million commercial and 20% loan left, I've owned it 80% outright, that will have a different buffer of course it has to have a different buffer than one that's 100% leveraged against a principal place of residence, because I've got two debts there. So you've got to look at the personal circumstances, look at what you can stomach. There will be people that want to push the envelope a little bit, and then there's other ones with lots of outgoings, lots of kids, lots of dependents, where they want to pull it back a bit.
Nice.
Yeah, I love it.
Should we?
It's number 5.
Enough risk.
You
I
do
don't
not
want to take any
understand
more risk.
commercial.
No more risk for me.
That's a
You
bloody,
do not understand
that is
commercial
risk.
property well.
That's
Shouldn't
bloody
this have
risk.
been number 1?
No, because to even decide to buy a commercial, you need to have your finance in order. You need to have all your serviceability. You got to look at all that. Like, yeah, but that's it's the obvious one. But residential, you can actually get away with not understanding it well. You'll do better if you obviously understand well. But if you're buying in a well-established capital city in suburbia, and you've looked at a couple macro factors like days on market, making sure there's no oversupply, tight vacancy rates, not in a flood zone, not a, I don't know, housing commission street or whatever it may be. You do a few checks. Long term, you'll probably be okay. Whereas commercial, you don't do those checks plus 1,000 other ones: lease review, contract review, tenant interviews, road and foot traffic analysis, check rental ledgers, P&L statements, credit history checks, vacancy studies, occupancy studies, speak with property managers, speak with town planners, checking just like easements through the property, what future developments are going on. You need to do that on every property. Otherwise, you might burn yourself. Like, you go and buy a commercial and then you find out they're building, I don't know, 20 warehouses nearby or a Westfield shopping center, and it completely drains your foot traffic. You've just shot yourself in the foot. You've spent a lot of money. It's dropped by 30%. You're probably going to lose your tenant. And then you've got this asset with no tenant and 100% debt that you kind of pay yourself. So a lot more to lose with commercial. So make sure you understand it. Like, not even trying to sell my services here. Just make sure you understand it.
That's the thing that really hits home for me with a commercial. Like, if you have a vacancy, like that vacancy could be 12 months, it could be 18 months. And it's not to say that, like, even Resi could have that much vacancy over a 10-year period. So when you have, but it's just having that all at one time is to me, feels a bit, makes you feel a bit uncomfortable.
It is, Jeff, but that's also one of my pet peeves with commercials. People just kind of blanket all of Australia and just say stuff like, oh yeah, but you got a 12-month vacancy. I'm buying suburbs where there's like a 1-week vacancy, 2-week vacancy. So like, you can mitigate some of that risk by buying well. But again, to point number 5, you need to understand commercial property. So it's like, you go and buy a residential property, that you can have a 6-12-month vacancy period as well. So you just got to make sure. Yeah. The thing is, most people really understand the fundamentals because they live in a house or an apartment. They understand sort of how it works. But not everyone ever rented a commercial workshop, for instance.
Yeah, and it's so easy just to throw out blanket statements like oh well, but if you have, like, the way I like to think about it is, if a property is bringing in $40,000 for the next 5 years, that's 40,000, and then year 3 there's a vacancy. You still have $80,000 that you've got there that you can cover $40,000 worth of cash. And then you have that 12-month vacancy. Great. Another 40,000, another 40,000. So I can definitely see that you need to hold on to a lot of the buffers that you are creating in the commercial space. But 40,000, as long as it doesn't happen straight away and you don't have any cash left and you're a little bit, oh, that's a bit scary. Yeah. But it is tough as well when you're buying a commercial property because you're already putting up 350,000 in your $1 million example. And then if something goes wrong, you still need to have another year's worth of buffer. So I can definitely see how people get scared into it.
We did that on the last slide. Remember, I brought up like a commercial cash flow and a resi cash flow, and I showed like the resi being 10 grand negative and the commercial being like 20 grand. And then we did like a 5-year forecast. And like you said, you've got a big buffer with commercial. Resi, if it didn't grow, you're actually at negative. If interest rates go up, you're at even more negative. So it's just kind of how you spin it. The biggest thing social media. Am I good? Can you hear me?
Now I can.
I think the internet's broken.
Yeah, I was saying on my social media, whenever I publicize commercial, there is always a comment on every post where people just go, yeah, but everywhere office space is sitting there empty. And I'm just like, cool. There's decrepit residential properties in mining towns. Like what's the point? I'm not advertising office space, for instance. So it depends what you're looking at.
Well, I'm excited to dive into some red flags because green flags are great, red flags are better because they're going to teach you something, and especially if those red flags burn you. How about we learn from the experts rather than getting burnt? So what are we diving into, Jeff? What's this next section about? Because we got to jump to a sponsored ad and then.
Yeah, so we're going to be talking about the I'm excited to talk about the red flags. Red flags are interesting, but now we're going to talk about the flags in properties. So I think this is
flags in property.
Bit of masterclass.
Property flags.
Property.
Okay, let's just clearly we are not good at introducing new segments. We're going to go to the ad and then we'll come back and talk about flags.
There's nothing worse than going into a situation unprepared, especially when that situation is purchasing one of the most expensive assets of your life against a trained property expert in the form of a real estate agent. It's a scary thought, but it is a skill that can be taught. Do you want to learn how to become fully prepared when buying a property so you can get out there, buy your dream home or investment property without the fear of actually messing it up? Scott Agate, the founder and expert property negotiator at Hello House, has been helping people buy their properties by stepping in and negotiating with the agents and saving his clients tens of thousands, and in some cases hundreds of thousands of dollars. Scott has now decided to share all that he's learned over the past 28 years in real estate so you can go out there and do the exact same thing on how to find a property, analyze that property, negotiate on that property, and transact on it to get the best results. He's created the Get Buyer Ready course, which is a step-by-step guide on how you too can become an expert property negotiator. It's the easy way of how you can avoid all of these agent games and get the best purchase price on that dream home or your investment property. The course is in short bites for busy people with no fluff at all. Just all the information you need to get buyer ready and secure that next property with confidence at the best price. Scott has been kind enough to give our community a massive discount with the link below. Sign up today before you even think about putting an offer on that next property, and it will be one of the best decisions you ever make.
We had that banner. Poor Scotty. He had that banner across. You do not understand commercial. Anyway, so we're back. We are back. As people are talking about what is the net yield on flags. I mean, I don't know. That's a good question.
Fantastic question. But one of the things I was going to say is people, like, I'm sure people have questions. We flagged a lot of the questions in here as well. So as we're going along, add them in, and we'll get to them at the end because there's a lot of good ones.
Yeah, flag away. So where are we going first, Palise? What is the first red flag people should look at in a commercial or with a commercial property?
So I've just no particular. I just dot pointing stuff out. High vacancy rates. So like, if you're going to take on a high vacancy rate property, you need to make sure the return there is to offset the risk. But for me, long term, if the area is not in demand, the vacancy rate is the demand of the area. That's how much people want to rent it. It's a good indicator for rental increases. It's a good indicator for capital growth. So like, high vacancy rates, completely walk it away from. If you're looking as another indicator for high capital growth, long days on market is obviously a bad one. So similar to residential, same fundamentals apply with commercial. So anything that you'd probably walk away with residential, definitely walk away with commercial. So just take that into account. All right. So high vacancy rates, long days on market are probably the first thing I check when I'm looking at a new area that I haven't bought before, because it's just a quick little thumb suck. Probably go into, it's not like resi where for a vacancy rate, there's no simple way to do it. You don't go to SQM and type in the postcode and you see the vacancy rate. There are some websites like Andrew Bean's got CP data, which will effectively, like, it's not foolproof, but it's pretty close to what you're seeing in the market. He basically tracks how many properties come on for lease and how many are still there after certain periods. And that gives him some indication. But to do it manually, you have to go on CoreLogic, find every comparable you can. If it went up for lease, how long it was on there for lease. So like, it's a bit of a grafting job. Then the other way is talk to a couple property managers and find out, like, on the ground, boots on the ground, Joe, what they're actually seeing in terms of like, okay, how quickly are they feeling it? What stuff is stuck around for long periods of time? What size of things change as well? So like if you're looking at an industrial, are the smaller ones going quicker than the bigger ones? And then what are the vacancy period differences versus the length of lease and things like that? So vacancy rates, days on market, first thing you should kind of look at for red flags if they're high, all right? Next one I've got is special levies. So you're going to say something, Jeff?
Can we go back to vacancy rates? I want to understand. So do you look at vacancy rates at the suburb level for that sort of thing, or like do you look how granular do you go with vacancy rates? And
Jeff's struggling on mine.
No, I was just saying. Like,
I don't know. I think it's you, mate.
How granular do you go with vacancy rates? Like, do you look at, let's just say, on I don't know, somewhere in Brisbane, so Redcliffe commercial kind of property? There's probably not that many commercial in Redcliffe, but anyway, let's just say that there's, I don't know, a cafe up there. How do you sort of want to understand the vacancy rate in that pocket, or like how do you do that sort of stuff?
Oh, okay. Good question. Because if you're doing industrial, you've obviously got a lot of like-for-like comparisons, because you can find the ones that went vacant in that complex, how long they were vacant for. And then you can extend the perimeter to like adjoining like industrial complexes, because there's not normally just one warehouse. They're normally in like a complex. Mm-hmm. Retail is much tougher, because it depends on what it is and what the foot traffic is and where you actually, like if you're buying, say, a little suburban retail strip shop where there's 10 shops in a row and they're all tenanted and there hasn't been a vacancy for 4 or 5 years, you don't know what the vacancy rate is. Like, you actually don't. You can go back and find maybe the one that went vacant 5 years ago or 10 years ago, whatever it may be, and see how long it went vacant for. But that's a very long time period ago. Who knows what if the population's changed it. Those ones, that's where you want boots on the ground. So you want to send people to go look at like how much buzz is in the area, the foot traffic, like what the vibrancy is of the actual complex. And look there. Certain ones you'll know, like, well, that's the success of the business. It's not necessarily the vacancy rate, and that's why you can have a stable business in a retail strip where there's other vacancies. You could have one where there's 10 shops, 3 of them are vacant, and the cafe could still be there for the next 20 years. So like that could theoretically, not ideal, but that could still be a good investment. So retail is a bit of a different. You got to understand like how businesses, competition analysis, the foot and road traffic and the exposure, what's in the area, like are they building some apartments there or Westfields that might compete with it? So I'm trying to make the red flags kind of pointed out to people. And then you can decide from there. Other ones, like we buy a lot of beachfront properties. So I love like East Coast, like Mooloolaba. I've bought like 2 or 3 places on Mooloolaba Beach. There's kind of like 30 properties there, and there's always like 1 vacant kind of every time. So you can get a bit of a thumb suck. But great question, Jeff. Retail is so much harder to give some form of like number. Mine normally vary by 12 months. I'll say, look, 0 to 2 years is kind of what I'm expecting for like a high risk thing.
Wow.
If it's a really busy strip, like a CBD type one, and you know, like there's been lots of vacancies in the last 10 years, you can give obviously a bit more of a detailed kind of answer.
Particularly,
so if I do have a vacant property, right, what are some of the things that I can do? Because I've got this thing sat here for 6, 8, 12 months. Like, what can I actually do to improve the likability of it or make someone excited about renting it? Like, what can I do?
Well, we'll talk retail, because industrial, probably not as much you can do. The answer is going to sort of parallel to both, but marketing campaigns from the property manager are game changers. Like, I've seen stuff where a client will come and like, oh, I've had this property, not the stuff I've bought, hopefully, where they're like, I've had this property vacant for a year now. I can't get it tenanted. I recommend a good property manager, and it's filled within a month. So like just someone do an active campaign, but it's just like, cause it's, especially if it's more of a regional on the outskirts of a city or something, there's more of a local community. So a really good property manager knows the businesses on the ground that are looking and waiting and stuff. If it's a bad one, they just put an ad on real commercial and they kind of sit there and wait. So you just need someone with an active kind of marketing mindset to kind of just do a big marketing push for it, and you should be able to fill it a bit quicker. There's also, if you've got something like a retail, you can offer incentives. So you can, like, a good property manager might say, look, we'll help you with the fit out costs by not charging you rent for 3 months and things like that. So you can add those little kind of value propositions to the client. But again, property manager advertising, paramount. Make sure you choose a good one.
Interesting. Okay. I will.
Unpack
I
it.
have a vacant space.
The next one is special levies, Palise. What are we talking about? Special levies.
So similar to like a townhouse or an apartment where you have like body corporates that look after the premises, occasionally there'll be a big special levy. So they won't have as much, like, enough money in the admin or sinking fund to be able to do a repair. So there might be something big coming down the track. So if I'm buying a 500K warehouse and there's a $50,000 special levy coming up in 3 years' time, probably going to walk away from that property or try to get money off the purchase price so I can kind of come out on front. And not necessarily the same amount of money. So like, say there's a 50 grand special levy, I'm not trying to get 50 grand off the purchase price, because 50 grand of my cash is worth more than 50 grand leverage, because 50 grand cash can be leveraged. So that's why you want to have a bit of a win there. Like that one, I might try to get $80,000 off the purchase price with the hope that I can then refinance and get that 50 grand back, and I've still made that kind of 30 grand extra bonus there. And a lot of people do that. They go, oh, there's a 15 grand levy coming up. Cool. Would you take 15 grand off the $1 million purchase price? And then they cop it on the chin. No, I want to make some money. Same things like a renovation. You don't want to do a renovation for the same cost. You want to make something for that effort.
How successful usually are those negotiations? Do you sort of, or will it depend on how long it's been on the market?
Yeah, it depends on the demand and what market we're in. I'd say about 50% of the time we come up to some arrangement. 100%. No, not necessarily 100%, because some people, if I'm buying in really tightly held areas and high demand areas, so there's plenty of owner occupiers and things like that will come in. They don't care. They want the property no matter what the cost. It just depends how far down the negotiation you get with it. Is it most of the time they might knock it off the price, but like I said, I always try to go for that little bit more.
Yeah, it's the same as when there's a property rented, right? Like in the I can only talk to the residential space as I don't buy commercial, but you get a property that's under market rent $100 a week, right? But 100 times 52 is $5,200 a year. But I'm not going to just take $5,200. I need $10,000 to make up for exactly that. It's the leverage, but it's also an opportunity to get a larger discount, because at the end of the day, you are just paying $5,200. So when there is an under market in the resi space, at least you can get a great buy. Actually, in the commercial space, that must be a good buying opportunity for you. Like a green shoot or a green flag must be a property that you know is under market rent. Like, does that exist? Like, how does that kind of work?
All the time, especially in this market where we're seeing like 15, 20% rental increase in the last year, because a lot of people on the historic leases, previously having a 3% fixed or 4 or 5% fixed was a really good lease. You're like, yes, this is beating inflation. So those are starting to come off now. They're the ones where you push the rent up 20%. So if you can negotiate on the purchase price based on the current rent, not the actual market rent, you've got a nice little 10, 20% upswing once you renew the lease.
Yeah, that's unreal. And then that's automatic. And then you can take that to the bank, right? You can say, hey, our property has increased in value by 20, 30%. Let's revalue it and go for the next one.
Yep, spot on. So, but however, they also, when they're doing the valuations, are taking the lower rent as well. So you want to make sure you are buying at the same market rate as the other one. So again, they're out there, probably about 1 in 5-ish. We're kind of buying in that scenario. Some of them are 5% below market rent. Other ones are like 20%. Other times the agents know. They're just like, look, rent's going up next year to this. Do you want it? And tight market, you have to cop it. Same thing with like the special levies. I've had properties where we're buying like $1 million or $2 million property, and there is a 10K special levy coming up. We've tried to get money off. They've said no, and we've still progressed because we've already invested $5,000 with like solicitor fees and like conveyancing and valuations and stuff like that. So for the sake of going back, trying to find another deal, spending another $5,000 on additional costs, we're going to end up in the same situation anyway. And we knew it's a good property, so we just cop it on the chin. But yeah, always try and negotiate as hard as you can.
Yep. Overlays. What are we talking about with overlays in commercial? Same as resi?
Yeah, same as resi. You just want to make sure there's nothing that's kind of shooting yourself in the foot. So like big noise corridors, land contamination's probably the biggest one for me. So check all the stuff around land contamination, because that, especially if you're buying freestanding, that's going to affect your value add. Again, another reason why I don't like petrol stations, for instance, because they're basically, to get that back to normal and change the tenant. This is what we mentioned about versatility of tenancy. You're up for a few $100,000 just to get the land right. So that's something I generally walk away. I've walked away pretty much. Actually, that's probably the biggest one. Land contamination is probably the non-negotiable one I walk away from every single time once we find it. Whereas other ones, there's always a back and forth and negotiation, but stuff like that where it's just not worth the risk, just walk away.
It's too costly, isn't it?
It is, but again, if you're an astute investor and there is money to be made in that type of stuff as well, if you can kind of get a bargain. And that's why things like petrol stations, I can get 8 to 12% net yields at the moment. So, and it's taking on that risk. So it just depends. If it's going to be there for 30 years and you've got to play that, okay, we're going to have paid off the property in like 10 years time and the next 20 years is going to be gravy, and who cares at the end if it sits there and we don't do anything with the site. That's, again, it's a calculated risk for your return. But what else
because you've got 3-4% of extra cash flow that's coming through, which kind of makes up for the risk. And if you are utilizing that cash, you can be okay. But also, what happens if Tesla just purchases every, like petrol station and just puts its chargers in there? I mean, it kind of makes sense. The reason the petrol stations are there is because people need to fill up their cars, the same as, but I haven't looked into it.
No, so you're actually right. So the one petrol station I bought a couple of months ago had a petrol station, had a big fancy cafe, had a BWS, a Woolworths, and I think it was a dog groomer or something like that. We had that chat about, okay, this might become like a charging station. I still liked it because it had the cafe, because people have got to sit there for half hour waiting for it to charge. By having amenities around it, like, oh, I'm just going to go take the dog down to get groomed and I'll charge the car there and the cafe and stuff. I'm like, this somewhat makes sense. And we got a really good yield. So like there's stuff like that does pop up. So you don't have to say no to everything. If it's your first, probably don't dip your toe into commercial with doing something complicated like that. Banks don't like them as well. The deal might look fantastic. Banks, any type of special properties, banks do not like. So cinemas, car wash stations, petrol stations, anything with one purpose, they don't like it because it's not a versatile asset. So like certain lenders will have an appetite, but chances are you'll get a low valuation or banks won't touch it and you have to be stuffing around with finance last minute trying to get something over the line.
Yeah, that's such a great point. Okay, well, let's hit some of these questions up. There's been a number that have come through. Everyone throw more of your questions as they come up.
Oh, hold on. How about I've got a few more dot points. How about I just rattle them off quickly so we go through them.
Oh,
Joe's done. He's giving us a wind up. That's right.
We got new Yep. Surprisingly, this is sort of the opposite for resi. New infrastructure can also be a risk. And I touched on it before. That's like if you're buying the little local cafe and they're building I don't know, a Woolworths or a Westfields around the corner, that'll kill foot traffic. Same thing as if you're buying like an industrial in like an outskirts area, like say you're buying an Ipswich, plenty of new infrastructure going in there. They might be building 30 warehouses in the suburb next to yours. That might flatline. Same thing with buying new builds for residential. That might keep the rents under wraps or drop it or increase vacancy. So that's one. So
on this point, just before we go to the next one, how do you identify that stuff? How do we know that there's something going on with the commercial space from a data perspective, right? Like there's tools out there from a residential space to see what approvals are coming through, but can you see approvals for what Ipswich Council is approving in commercial space?
Yeah, it's not approvals for resi, it's approvals through council. So you go to the PDP website on the councils. If you want, waste a town planner's time, give them a buzz, ask them about the property, find out. They'll tell you straight away. They'll have a quick desktop check and have a look. So yeah, talk to a town planner. Go on the council website.
They get paid for doing something, haven't they, Palise? What else? They don't approve things very much, so
I'm surprised every town planner is not a millionaire. Like, how do they not make a boatload of money?
Because they get harassed by every AusProp investor on every single property they buy about what they can do with the site, and they don't get paid.
Too busy.
It's
too busy.
Yeah, it's the same. Same as
it's like a world-class chef probably doesn't go home and cook a nice meal for their partner.
Or you wait for the AusProp investor to call you up, tell you about this amazing deal. You say it's not available and nothing can be done. Buy the deal.
Sure, people don't.
You still need the funds though. People always go to me like, "Oh, why? If you're so wealthy, Steve, why are you being a buyer's agent?" I'm just like, because I can't buy an infinite amount of properties. Like, you gotta have some form of income.
You've got to do some of your time as well. Like, there's only so much time you can spend manicuring your beard. But so unapproved structures is our next. Or do you want to untackle more or unpack more on infrastructure, or how about unapproved structures?
No, we'll get through it because I can see Joe's getting a little bit tired. So unapproved structures. So everyone should understand this. It's the same as residential. If you're buying a freestanding site, unapproved structure, you run the risk of being flagged by council and you having to knock it down. Even more critical with commercial, because that might be square meters that you're getting rent for. So if you've got to wipe that out, you might lose your tenant, and the value of the property diminishes as well. It's not like having an unapproved shed on a residential where nothing's really going to happen besides the cost of losing it. You might lose value of the property because of it. So same deal. Cross the T's, dot the I's. Check unapproved structures. Lack of growth in the area, so similar to residential. So if the area is not growing in population and values, you got to work out where you're at with the cycle. We've mentioned service type dying, so things like petrol stations, banks is another one. You get a high yield for a bank, but most of them are closing up shop because no one goes in them anymore. One of the other ones I'll occasionally walk away from is undisclosed leasebacks. So a leaseback is where the seller is the tenant. So the ones where I find that as part of due diligence, I automatically just disregard everything they've said. If they say, going to stay on for 5 years, we're signing this fresh year lease. If they didn't tell me that up front, I know they're not going to stay. They're just doing it to get a good price. They've put themselves on a good, strong lease. They're going to wrap it up somehow. And you should discover that through credit history checks and like what entity, and they're not going to put a big bank guarantee or a huge bond on it because of it. So yeah, undisclosed leasebacks is another one we kind of crash on. I'm not against buying a property with a lease back, but there has to be merit in it, and there has to be some form of reason why they're leasing it back, not just selling it and moving on.
And there must be a number of reasons why. Like, they need the capital to expand the business, right? They know that they bought this commercial property to be a little cash cow for them, but now they're like, wow, business is going really strong. We want to put that into the business and grow it that way. So I guess there could be some reasons why they would do that.
The other one is a business partner is getting out of the business. And like a lot of the times the other owner doesn't have the money to kind of buy them out, but they've got the property. So they sell the property and then rent it back because they don't want to lose the business. So there are some genuine reasons. 2 out of 3.
But they'll disclose them up front.
Yeah, well, not necessarily, because agents aren't necessarily disclosing it, but we find out pretty quickly because you see who the owner is, you do the credit history checks, and you check their ABNs, ACNs, and all that type of stuff. But as long as they've kind of giving a reason, most of the agents tell us because they know if they burn us, we're not going to go back to them for another property. So they're fairly honest for real estate agents, in quotation marks. All right. And the last one to finish, too good to be true. I get sent by people all the times. Oh, Steve, look at this property. I found a 9% yielding one, an area you're only buying 6%. I don't even bother. I don't even look at it. Like there will be a reason why they're selling that. People aren't idiots. People don't want to sell their property for a discount to average Joe for no reason. There's a reason. They're hiding it. Don't even waste your time.
One of those leasebacks things where they're gonna vacate the premises after or something.
Yeah, the problem is most people fall into the trap because they don't do the due diligence. So like the too good to be true ones, I always find out when I do the due diligence, and then it's just a pain in the bum because like my clients spent a bit of money on inspections and conveyancing and building and pest and valuations and all that stuff. So it just leaves a bad taste in the mouth. The ones where I actually find the unicorns are the ones that looked really boring from the get-go. And you're like, oh, it looks like it ticks the boxes. They're the ones where you dig a bit deeper and you're just like, oh, wow, there's some really cool value add here that they don't know about. Or, oh, they've actually got the rent wrong here. The rent's actually 20% under, like you mentioned before, Joe. They're the ones that actually turn into a unicorn.
I tell you the ones where I like it in resi, at least. I know we're not really talking resi, but I will. Is where there's a zoning where you like and it doesn't specifically mention the ad, and you sort of look at the price and you chat to the, or you're chatting to the agent or whatever, and they're like, oh, okay, interesting. So you just go you go quiet and you just sort of wait for them to mention it. If you mention it, you kind of kick yourself a little bit. You're like, oh crap, they do know.
Yeah.
But if they don't mention, if the vendor doesn't know, or they don't realize that they're sitting on a gold mine to add a bedroom or something like that, that's where you can really, really scoop up a bargain, at least in resi.
You get some really good resi opportunities with freestanding commercial as well. So you might buy like a freestanding retail that's one story, but it's an absolute gold mine to build a block of apartments or something like that. But they've got no idea like that because the owner of the standard retail isn't a developer. So they just know they've got a business in the rent. That's right. So you can do it. The lease can finish and all of a sudden you build up, and you can also do that with commercial with like extra like warehouses and my cafe, for instance, I can build up to 42 meters. So I could build a couple stories on residential on top of it. Probably wouldn't. If the tenant ever leaves properly, I'll probably knock it down and build something a bit more purpose built because it's across from a hospital. But you could
do shop top housing. Keep his say, look, I'm giving you a new cafe. You're just going to have to sit and wait for a year and a half, but I'll give you 42 units and a new cafe.
And you can also, sometimes good for business owners, like especially the hardworking ones, they actually love that part of the incentive is they get to rent above so they can stay there long term. And so that's the fun part of commercial. It's so wild with what you can do. You really kind of got to focus and just look on each deal case by case, what's possible. But yeah, value adds the cream on top. It's not a reason to buy.
Yeah. Okay.
All right.
Solid.
And that's it. We're done for red flags.
Yeah. Someone wrote exactly, even adding a car park to commercial helps increase its value, which is such a weird thing, isn't it? All you're doing is spraying a piece of concrete with line. All of a sudden that's car parking space. Didn't you just say you rent? Did you say you were renting out car parking space to somebody?
$20 a week.
So because my cafe has 10 car spots behind it, I rent them out to commuters because I'm next to a train station. So I think I get $40, $50 a week per car spot. So Dad starts adding up. Oh no, I lied. No, $40, $50 a month per car spot. So it gives me an extra.
I was going to say $40, $50 a week. Jeez, per month. That's like per month. 500. That's $1,000.
The other one, if you've got an industrial property with a big kind of land component, I've seen clients do this because the tenant's not using the big land component. They rent it out just for storage or machinery storage. So like a lot of like excavators and trucks and stuff, they've got to park somewhere at night. They just park there. So you do nothing. You literally just get another tenant that uses part of the land and they just drive in and park their car there.
Yeah. Yeah. Just have a little gate up and that's it. Yeah. $10,000 gate and it does its thing and boom.
I know. So we've got some questions coming up.
Here's a great one. Do you ever get a tenant out and get a better one in? You know, you will get a better rent. You'll get, because the property manager has one lined up. So you get a new, better tenant lined up. Do you remove the old one?
I've not had to do that personally. I know what they're getting at. Probably not for industrial, more for retail.
It's from Nicole, by the way.
Yeah, for retail, there is some opportunity because certain tenants increase the value of premises. So like if I had just like a little hobby shop or something like that, and then my property manager was like, I've got this doctor dying to get into your location. Your lease is up at the end of next year. Do you want to put them in? 100%, because all of a sudden that 6.5% yielding retail will drop to a 5% cap rate, which will increase the value by 20, 30% by getting that one in. It is hard though, because a lot of people are on multiple lease terms. They're not just on, even if they're on a 3-year lease, they're on a 3x3x3. So they've got first choice of it. You can't just be like, nah, see you later, getting you out. If they pay market rent, they pay market rent. But putting a better tenant will increase the value. Changing the mix of tenants, if you own a whole retail strip, is actually really important as well. The getting rental increases and increasing the demand for a retail strip comes from a good diversity of tenants. So you don't want 3 bakeries in the same complex, because they're all gonna die and flounder about, and that's how you get vacancy. You want like one cafe, one barber shop, one hairdresser, one medical center, one dentist. You want a good mix of tenants as well. That can increase the value because it'll push the rents up, because it makes the area a bit more hustling and bustling. Online marketing surprisingly does well for bigger shopping centers. So if you've got like good websites and it's like a drive to get people there, that can even help. Yeah. Signage, surprisingly. So you put a really good sign so people can see what's in the complex. That will necessarily bring more foot traffic as well. And it's not an instant gratification, but it's a great long-term play, because the more people going into the shopping complex and the more foot traffic means you can charge more rent for those same
because
tenants.
the business is making more money.
Boom, we're on.
Boom. I'll take 2. Hey, actually, there's a question here. Not really a question. We put containers on there and rent them out.
That's not Andrew Bean, is it? Get him off.
No. It's Luke Doran.
That's Luke Doran.
According to
Luke. We should get Luke on live
Facebook. We should.
Yeah.
So it's super interesting though. Like, how much does a container is like $2 or $3 grand? Surely it pays itself off pretty quickly.
And Andrew Bean just flew up to Mackay because he does consulting for self-storage. And on a self-storage site, they just laid down, I think it was like 10 containers to increase the thing. So they didn't build anything. They just dumped purpose-built containers on for self-storage. So all that stuff. This is where a good property manager comes in though, because you can have all these great ideas. The property manager's got to find the tenants and also work with you. There's no point me just having a property, put in some containers on there. I still need someone to rent it out. So like that's where the good property manager comes in.
Oh, there you go. Good old
Andrew
Stevie.
Bean he's got his ears everywhere. He's got it all over the place. Well, Luke is saying he got $60 per week for it. And if he has 5 of those
does he call you Stevie, does he?
That's his pet name for me.
Oh, well, there we go.
Not Stephen.
Not Stephen.
No, that's Luke.
$60 per week, though, for a little unit. Like, that pays itself off very quickly. I love that.
$3 grand a year.
And also, the thing is, people, as Andrew Bean said in the podcast that we did with him, is people are buying more stuff. We are a very consumer-driven society, and people are like, where do I put all this stuff? And our houses are getting smaller. We're now, instead of being on 800 square meter blocks, we're now on 400 square meter blocks, but we got more stuff. But we don't like throwing things away, but we don't want to fill the house up and look like a hoarder. So what do? We got to have space. So I reckon I am all for self-storage. I think if when I go into the commercial space, I'm going to be totally headed to the self-storage.
Yeah.
Maybe we could start a business show, JJ Space.
Well,
Jeff and Joe
actually,
Space.
Steve has already started this bloody thing. Do you want to talk? Maybe we don't talk to that, but I'm interested to actually, we will talk about it. What's the go with developing commercial space as well? Like, how do you think about that? Because you just created a development company. I imagine it's going to be in the residential and commercial space, but like, what are your thoughts on reframe it again? Buying house and land off the plan apartments is a big no-no in the residential space. Mm-hmm. Is that the same thing in the commercial space? Should we be thinking at the same terms, or maybe it's something worthwhile looking into?
You can buy off the plan ones, and i.e. ones that are there. I buy the ones that are near completion though. So not like I'm not putting the 5% deposit down, waiting 3 years for it kind of thing. They're kind of like ready to go. I will buy them once they've got a tenant lined up. So once they're nearing completion, they've got a tenant lined up. There's nothing wrong with buying a brand new one. You typically, same deal as residential. You pay a little premium to get the brand new one. However, you get huge depreciation. So that'll sometimes offset the premium. But then a lot of people like that. Again, it's the same argument residential, that it's going to be stupidly low maintenance for the next 10 years because it's brand new. You've got a fresh tenant. It's clean, tidy. There's all this up. But you just got to, again, the yield's got to make sense. You got to be buying the right yield. Don't go out and buy the ones where it's like, oh, I've got this plot of land. We're doing it. It's going to be done in 2 years' time, because it won't be. It'll be done in 4 years' time. Even the ones we've bought where they say it's 3 months to go, they always blow out to 5-6 months. It's always double what they say. It's just getting leases registered, land registered, all that type of stuff. But there are some good opportunities if it's in a good area. Especially owner occupiers love them as well because they want to buy their space and have it dedicated and put their funds into it that way. But not against them, but be wary of them.
Congrats on that, by the way. The development company that Liam yourself just kicked off. Well done.
Yeah, no, cheers, man. So hopefully, my main aim is I want to get into some commercial developments. Main reason for that, I want to pay off my house quicker. I'm going to buy a principal place of residence. let's knock it off in 5 years' time as opposed to 10. Done, and that's it. Other people have different purpose. Like with commercial, we might build a warehouse complex, and then like Liam or the other investors will keep a few of them and you sell the rest for the profits. So that way you're building your passive income whilst also getting some capital from it to accelerate the portfolio. And it's just an aggressive strategy.
For free.
Yeah, get a unit for free. It's an aggressive strategy. Make your margins that way. Not for everyone, but if you're trying to push the envelope and you can take on the risk, then the numbers make sense.
Let's get to these questions. So if people want to keep throwing the questions, probably have one more to slot in. So if you're the next in, we'll probably ask it. What's your thoughts on starting out investing in your early 50s? Time isn't on my side, and I feel like I need to go straight to commercial in SMSF to take advantage of my limited working years. Ooh, I don't know.
Okay. So question. Early 50s is not that old. People think
you
that like
time.
You're likely going to live to probably 90-ish. Like as we keep benefiting, like you will, fingers crossed, you'll be 85 to 100 plus years old. Like that's a long time. Like most young investors that have made really good portfolios have done it in 10, 15 years. So you can still set up a really good retirement in the next kind of 15 years if you want to retire at 65. The harder part for you is finance. And this is where I think they've gone into the fact that they need self-managed super fund is the banks are also looking at that you're 50 and you've only got 15 years to pay off a loan. So all the younger people that have 30 years to pay off a mortgage, you've got to do it in half the time, which is going to hurt your serviceability, your extra payments, and that's where it gets hard. Self-managed super funds are a good advantage because there's huge tax advantages, as Jeremy, the accountant, kind of spoke about as well. But yeah, you got time on your side. Like most investors have made really good money in 10, 15 years. So I probably just wouldn't do it too aggressively. I just, again, like we mentioned on what was it, point 3, understand your risk profile and then do it from there.
There we go.
Solid. What other questions?
How do we work out valuations when you buy empty commercial and then add a 5-year lease? Well, the valuer does it for you, don't they?
No, to make an offer before the valuer, you should be making an offer. There's different methods to value commercials. So the first one's obviously comparables. So if you could find a comparable empty commercial, you'd compare it with that. If you can find the tenanted ones, work out what the market rent would be on your one with that 5-year lease, and then compare like for like that way. Then you've also got like the cost replacement method, which is like how much is the land, how much is it to build one. But the comparable method's probably the easiest. It depends what market you buy in. Weirdly enough, some markets, vacant ones sell for more than tenanted ones. And that's because some markets are more owner-occupied. There's more demand for a vacant one because a business wants to move in straight away. Not all the time. But so if you're in that market, you might actually be buying at the same price. You're not actually adding value. If you're in a bit more of an investor rental market, and you pick up a little bit of a bargain, you get the 10% cheaper because it doesn't have a tenant, which I do sometimes do this with my high net worth clients, put the tenant in there, go to the bank, value the property, get the equity that way. Some things to be mindful though when you're buying a vacant one. It sounds good in theory. I'll buy a vacant one 10% cheaper, put a tenant in there, make my 10% instantly. You don't have serviceability when you've got a vacant property. You don't get to go to a full doc loan because there's no rent coming in. So the bank, it's not like Resi where you get a rental appraisal from a property manager and they take that. It's not as simple. So finance is a lot harder. A vacant property, you also don't purchase as a going concern. You have to pay GST. So you've got 10% of the purchase price you have to drum up for cash as well. You do get that back on like in your first BAS statement though. So it's not completely gone. As soon as you can get it back. But you're not going to get a high LVR because it's vacant. It's going to be struggling with serviceability. and you've got 10% extra cost just for the GST and a lower LVR. So you've got a lot more skin in that game if you start talking 30, 40, 50% deposits to get into the deal. So they are right. You can make a bit of money, and just look at both. Look at the comparable vacant properties, look at the comparable tenanted ones, and try to make your margin there.
There you go. That's not one I've thought about in that way before, because it's interesting to hear the downside or the cons rather than just think, oh yeah, going to snap up a bargain. I usually think of the pros, but got to think of the cons as well. So I think that we might make this the last question, which is an interesting one. I mean, we're just speaking generally here, folks, but yeah, the question is, this is Suki. He asked a similar question about the difference between a REIT versus commercial property, but he said, would you be better off investing passively in real estate investment trusts if the yield is similar? I don't know. I said, don't own the asset though, but I don't know.
Yep. All right. So I'll talk positives of those. Those you're buying bigger assets. So you can get like a lot of times they buy office space, which I find a bit weird, but like you can buy like a big industrial complex or a big like shopping center, which you normally wouldn't be able to afford. So you can get some stability of income because there's 20, 30 tenants. Some REITs have like multiple properties as well. They've got like 2 or 3 in different locations. So it's low risk in that regards. Most of them are only leveraged at 50% though, because there's not one investor. You're only getting 50% leverage when you're getting your dividends. So they're the positives with it. It's also the negatives is you don't get to leverage higher than 50%. So if you go out and buy yourself, you can get 70, 80% leverage. So you're actually going to make more capital growth. You touched on it, Jeff. You're going to get more control because you own the asset. There's more things you can do and more triggers you can pull to go from there. But the biggest one for me is the leverage. You lose out on the leverage, and you kind of it's no different to a share. Like it's nice. It's a nice stable investment, but it's just a form of shares. Like you're just looking at a return. The power of commercial though, even though you get similar yield, you will get the much bigger return from owning the asset, because if you start looking at cash on cash, so you put 250 grand into $1 million deal and you get say 25 grand a year cash flow back on that property, that's actually a 10% return cash on cash. Whereas the other one might only be say 7%. If we then get say 5% capital growth on top of that, that becomes like a 20, 22% return on investment cash on cash. So that's the power. So you should be able to get a much bigger return from buying the asset. But that, again, as I said at the start, that comes with risks. You also lose bigger if the property drops in value as well, or you lose a tenant, whereas the other ones are a bit more of a stable investment, assuming it's a good one, assuming they've bought some good quality stock.
There you go.
Is
there anything that Palise hasn't thought about? Like, what are some things? Like, I just feel like you come up, like, ask you a question and you just have an answer to it. I'm like, oh, it makes sense.
Almost like I've been doing this full time for a long time.
Yeah,
you know what's funny, Jeff? I said that facetiously, but I still learn stuff every day. And this is the whole argument. People say, oh, I don't need a buyer's agent, stuff like that. If I'm still learning stuff like 1,600 plus deals down the line, like how uninformed is the person who's bought 1 or 2? Like, so there are things, and I'm not saying like I've changed my strategy 3 or 4 times throughout my investing career. Every time I find something new, I'm like, oh, that's way better. And I go down that route. So that's why going to an expert that's done it is actually beneficial, and why you have a chat with Joe and me and other good buyers agents, because we'll hopefully stop you making a mistake, or at least shed some light that you haven't thought about before.
Yeah, and the way I like to think about like strategy and portfolio is just look at what this property needs to be to allow you to get into the next one. I see people getting so confused and conflated. They're like, oh my gosh, what is it going to look like in 20 years? I was almost got a financial plan. I almost paid $8,000 for a financial plan at the age of 18. And this guy told me he's going to map out my entire life on a piece of paper. And I'm like, but that's not factoring in I'm traveling Asia for 2 years, or that I'm moving here and doing this. Like, just do what is going to help you for this next purchase. Have like a shining light at the end of the tunnel there, but don't stretch yourself too far out. Like, just why, what does this property need to be to allow me to get in the next one, and then fully reevaluate your situation, factoring in this purchase that you've just got, and then you can go for the next one, and then you can go for the next one, as long as you're making sure that you can continue to go for that next one. You don't have to make it too difficult.
Probably
remember
to live as well, I suppose.
Yeah, I find a lot of people, Joe, as well, get analysis paralysis on the region as well. That it's like, oh, I don't know whether to buy like Perth or Melbourne or this and that. Okay, maybe stress about that if you're buying one, but most of my clients don't want to just buy one. So, oh, cool. Say we go buy in Brisbane and Perth does 7% and Brisbane does 5%. We're going to buy another one and diversify the location later on anyway. So, in the grand scheme of things, you're not losing the whole lot. You're just losing the difference in your choice. And that's where I find most people get held back. They can't make the commitment to actually have a go.
Yeah, that makes such a big difference. You have made it very clear to me today, Steve Palise, that commercial property is a risky endeavor.
Kermit then. Kermit property.
Steve Kermit.
You've made it very, very clear that there is a lot more to commercial property than what it looks like on the surface, and that if I was buying a commercial property, even though I am currently a buyer's agent and I buy a lot of property, I would 100% be using a commercial property. And believe it or not, it would probably be you, to be fair.
Probably.
Yeah, I might get, if I get a discount. Friends and family discount. But how can people, you've clearly shown that you know your stuff and that there's a lot of checks out there. I would be blown away if someone goes out there and tries to buy their first commercial property ever by themselves. But you know, that people do their thing. How do people learn more about Steve Palise and Palise Property, my man?
Get the book. So the Ozprop, it's free. I know the ad we said 50%. So if you want this thing, go on the website, paliseproperty.com.
Have you still got the 100% off? Have you? Or?
Yeah, I haven't touched it. I can't be bothered. Ozprop for free. Too lazy. Yeah, do that. But paliseproperty.com, type in my name on any of the socials. I'm out and I'm pretty responsive in Ozprop. So just tag me and post in Ozprop and yeah, all good.
I love it. paliseproperty.com.au. You're the man. That was unreal. That was a really good session. I enjoyed that. Yeah, Did you enjoy that, Jeff?
I learned quite a bit. Like that's why every time I feel like I get a little bit smarter each time I speak to Palise. So, oh yeah, here we go. Somebody said so good. Steve, who's Steve? Steve Lowell. Stevie Lowell. Oh, is that Beanie? No, it's Kylie. I wonder, do you call Andrew Bean Beanie or like what's his nickname? Maybe tell us after. Like you'll have to reach out to Steve and ask him what he calls Andrew. I don't know. Tell us.
Let's do it. Let's go buy a commercial property.
Thanks, everybody.
Cracking session.
Leave us a review, by the way, everybody. Leave us a 5-star review if you've gotten value. We need to ask more for that, Joe. Okay.
Oh, okay. Well, leave us a review, people.